They kept James in holding for 17 hours before even letting him call his mother. A cold bench. A flickering light. No answers. Every time he asked what he was doing there, they gave the same flat reply. Wait for your lawyer. But what lawyer? He'd never needed one before. They'd brought him into a room with peeling paint and a table bolted to the floor. 2 detectives walked in, older white men with tired faces and hard eyes. Let's talk, James, one said, casually opening a folder. James leaned forward, confused. Talk about what? About the robbery. About the gun. About the $500 you took. I didn't take anything. I just bought a soda and chips. Check the cameras. They ignored him, just kept reading from the folder. They weren't asking to understand. They were asking to trap him. One of them leaned close, voice low. Look, if you confess now, maybe the judge goes easy. But if you lie, you're looking at serious time. James shook his head, heart pounding. I didn't do anything. They pushed harder. Used phrases like, you're kind. Like, we've seen this before. Like, just admit it, son. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the case closed. Eventually, they gave him a public defender. Overworked. Underpaid. A stack of cases on his desk. James met him for 10 minutes before the arraignment. You'll probably get a plea deal, the lawyer said. I'm not pleading guilty. I didn't do it. The lawyer sighed. It's your word against a witness. A sweet old lady on the stand versus you? Come on. Think smart. That was the first time James felt real fear. Because the truth wasn't going to be enough. The courtroom was small, but it felt enormous. Cold wooden benches. People whispering. Reporters in the back. His mother sat quietly, clutching a handkerchief like it was the only thing keeping her together. The prosecutor painted him as a danger to the community. Said the witness was certain it was him. Said James had the motive, the time, the opportunity. It didn't matter that the description was vague. It didn't matter that no fingerprints were found. It didn't matter that surveillance footage from a nearby ATM showed someone who looked nothing like him at the time of the robbery. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. And when they came back, the foreman didn't even look up. Guilty on all counts. James didn't cry. Not right away. He just stared straight ahead, jaw locked, as his mother sobbed behind him. 20 years. 20 years in state prison. He turned once, as the bailiff led him away. Looked at his mom. She mouthed, I love you. He nodded, and disappeared behind the door. He kept replaying it in his head, over and over. How can this be happening? How do you prove you're not something they already decided you are? The gavel had fallen, and the system had spoken. But it wasn't justice. It was just over. Or at least, that's what it felt like. James Miller never thought his life would change on a Tuesday. It was a warm, slow afternoon in a small town in Georgia. The kind of day where time moves just a little bit softer, the sun a little bit lower in the sky. James had just finished his shift at the auto shop, grease on his hands, sweat on his brow, and that satisfied kind of tired you only get from a full day's work. He wasn't in a rush. He never was. James wasn't the kind of guy who drew attention. Quiet. Polite. Head down, work hard. He lived with his mother in a modest house 2 blocks from the shop. She always waited up for him, usually with dinner warm on the stove and some rearing crime show playing in the background. But that day, he decided to stop at the corner store on his way home. Just a quick errand. A soda, maybe some chips. Nothing out of the ordinary. He nodded to the clerk, gave a little smile. How you doing? Grabbed his things and walked out. Just like always. What James didn't know is that less than 10 minutes later, The store would be swarmed with police tape and flashing lights. And his life would never be the same again. Later that evening, James sat on the couch, flipping through the channels, already half asleep. His mom was humming in the kitchen, fixing plates. Peaceful. Familiar. Then came the knock. Not just a knock. A pounding. James opened the door to find two officers standing on the porch, one with a badge out, the other with his hand already on his holster. "James Miller?" "Yes, sir." "You're under arrest for armed robbery." He laughed. At first. Thought it was a mistake. But the cuffs were cold and real. His mother screamed. The neighbors watched. And just like that, the world tilted. Down at the station, they asked him where he was at 4:52 p.m. He told them, "At the store, buying soda." "Ask the clerk, check the cameras." But they didn't want to hear that. They had a witness. An elderly woman. Said she saw a young black man with a gray hoodie and dark jeans. That's all it took. James matched the description, vaguely. No fingerprints. No weapon. No surveillance video placing him inside the scene of the actual crime. But the wheels had already started turning. And once they turn, they don't stop for the truth. James sat in that cold, gray cell, staring at the wall, trying to piece together what had just happened. He didn't know that this was just the beginning. He didn't know that the next time he'd walk out a free man, he'd be almost 45. To James, it had just been another day. But to the system? It was the day they made a mistake that would cost him 20 years of his life. They gave him a number. Not a name. Not a second chance. Just a number. And a blue uniform 2 sizes too big. James Miller became inmate number 347521. The prison they sent him to was 2 hours outside the city, surrounded by razor wire, crumbling concrete, and a sky that always looked gray, no matter the weather. He didn't speak for the first 3 days. Didn't eat much either. Just stared at the wall in his cell. 8 by 10 feet. One bed. One toilet. One thin window with bars. And silence. But not the peaceful kind. The kind that presses on your chest. James wasn't a fighter. He wasn't built for this place. But prison doesn't care who you are. Only who you become. In his first month, he was jumped in the yard by 2 guys who thought he looked too soft. Broken ribs. No punishment for them. Just a cold tray of food at night, and the sound of someone crying in the next cell over. Sometimes it was him. Letters from his mom became the only light he had. Every week, without fail, her shaky handwriting arrived. Telling him to pray. Telling him not to give up. Telling him she believed him. "Hold on, baby. I'm still fighting." He wrote back less and less. Not because he didn't care. Because he didn't want her to know how dark it was getting inside him. He didn't want her to know that hope was starting to feel like a joke. Years passed. The seasons changed outside, but inside? Every day felt the same. He watched young men come in at 20, turn bitter at 25, broken by 30. Some never left. Some didn't make it to parole. Some simply gave up. James began spending time in the prison library. Not because he liked reading. Because it was quiet. Because the guards didn't look twice if you had a book in your hands. That's where he found it. A dusty old volume on criminal appeals. Case law. Precedents. Evidence errors. Something lit up inside him. He didn't know why. Maybe desperation. Maybe it was the only fight left. But from that moment, he read every day. Page after page. Note after note. Highlight after highlight. He learned the language they used against him. He learned how broken the system was. He learned that maybe, just maybe, there was still a way out. By year 10, James had changed. Not just older. Not just tougher. but sharper, focused. And then, one afternoon in the yard, a conversation changed everything. A new inmate, mid-30s, rough voice, tattoo across his throat, looked over and said, "Hey, weren't you locked up for that store robbery back in '03? James nodded cautiously. The man tilted his head. "Man, I know who did that. I used to run with him. That wasn't you." James froze. "What did you just say?" The man shrugged. "Dude's name was Reggie. Looked kinda like you, but slimmer. Used the same move, hoodie, quick grab, out the back. Hit 3 places that month." James couldn't breathe. For the first time in a decade. Someone else said it. "You didn't do it." That night, James sat on the edge of his cot, holding a pencil like a lifeline. And he wrote his mother a letter that simply said, "Ma, don't stop fighting. I think I found a crack in the wall." The system tried to bury him. But now, James was digging back. Hope is a strange thing in prison. Too much of it, and it can break you. Too little, and you disappear inside yourself. But James finally had a reason to hope again. The man in the yard, Darnell, agreed to testify. Said he used to roll with a guy named Reggie Wallace, known for hitting gas stations and corner stores. Same pattern, same style, same month as the robbery James got pinned for. "He even bragged about it," Darnell said. "Told me he got away clean. Said some other dude took the fall." That other dude was James. James's hand shook as he wrote the statement down, word for word. He mailed it to his mother, to a legal aid group, to anyone who might care. Most never wrote back. But one letter did. Her name was Erin Caldwell, a young lawyer, fresh out of law school. She joined a non-profit that helped fight wrongful convictions. "Your letter stuck with me," she said. "I read your case. Something's not right." James didn't know how to answer. No one had said those words to him in almost 11 years. She promised to visit. And she did. A week later, she sat across from him in the visitation room, tight bun, thick glasses, a legal pad already full of notes. "I'm going to need everything," she said. "Trial transcripts, evidence logs, the original defense strategy." James handed over a box he'd kept under his bed for years. Every appeal that got denied. Every handwritten note. Every scar. It wasn't easy. Reggie Wallace had vanished. No arrest record since 2004. No address. No family willing to talk. The old witness? Still alive. Still certain it was James. The system didn't want to admit its mistake. "Why dig up a 20-year-old case?" they'd say. "He was found guilty. Move on." But Erin didn't stop. She filed a motion to reopen the case, citing new evidence and a potential confession. The DA pushed back. Called it unreliable jailhouse gossip. James felt the walls closing in again. Then a break. Reggie Wallace was arrested in another state, on an unrelated charge. Erin petitioned for access to speak with him. 2 weeks later, she sat in a holding cell across from a man with tired eyes and shaking hands. He didn't deny it, didn't admit it either. But he said one thing. "Tell James the first never meant for him to take the hit. I was just trying to disappear." It wasn't a confession. Not yet. But it was something. Enough to push forward. In the meantime, James waited. Not for release. He'd learned not to count days. But for movement. Something other than silence. Something other than no. Then, after 14 years inside, James was called into the warden's office. A letter waited on the desk. "Case accepted for review. Possible retrial pending." James didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just closed his eyes and whispered, Ma, we're not done yet. It wasn't freedom, but it was the first step toward it. The system tried to forget him. But now, the system would have to look him in the eyes. The courtroom looked the same. Same pale walls. Same hard benches. Same judge's bench, towering like a gatekeeper of fate. But this time, James wasn't sitting there as a silent, scared young man. This time, he came back with a voice. It took 18 months of legal battles just to get a hearing. Objections. Motions. Delays. The prosecution tried everything to shut it down. Unreliable new evidence. Witness recantation is too late. The conviction has stood for over a decade. But Erin? She wasn't backing off. She stood before the judge with a binder nearly bursting. Your Honor, she said, voice calm but cutting. This is not about a mistake in paperwork. This is about a man who has spent half his life paying for a crime he did not commit. Then she laid it all out. Darnell's statement. The timeline inconsistencies. Reggie Wallace's unofficial admission. The missing footage never shown at trial. And the fact that James's public defender never called a single witness in his defense. The judge listened. Stone-faced. Silent. Then came the witness. Darnell was brought in under heavy supervision. Tattoos faded now, but his memory sharp. He looked directly at James and said, That man right there didn't do it. I swear on my life. And I've got no reason to lie. I already did my time. The room was still. Even the DA stopped writing for a moment. But they pushed back. Hard. The prosecutor leaned in. So now you remember this after 14 years? Convenient, don't you think? Darnell didn't flinch. You're right. It took me a long time to grow a conscience. But that doesn't make what I'm saying less true. The judge recessed the court for 2 weeks. 2 long weeks. James went back to his cell, but it felt different now. Not quite a cage. More like a waiting room. His mom came to see him the next day. She was thinner now. Her hair fully gray. But her eyes still carried fire. I knew it, she whispered, holding his hand across the scratched glass. I knew you'd come home one day. James didn't reply. His heart was pounding too hard to speak. When the court reconvened, the judge delivered his ruling. He cleared his throat, looked over the rim of his glasses. This court acknowledges the presence of new and compelling evidence and the failure of the original defense to meet minimum standards of representation. James held his breath. Therefore, this court is vacating the conviction of James Miller and granting a new trial. Gasps in the room. James didn't move. He didn't know how. The words hit him like thunder, but he wasn't free yet. Not until the DA decided whether to retry the case. That night, in his cell, James stared at the ceiling for hours. Not angry. Not afraid. Just overwhelmed. He thought about the people he met inside. The ones who'd never see this day. The ones still holding onto letters. Still praying someone listens. And in that moment, James made a promise. If I ever walk out of here, I'm not walking out alone. 1 week later, the DA's office made its announcement. No retrial. All charges dropped. After 17 years, 8 months, and 4 days, James Miller was finally a free man. But that's the next chapter. And when that chapter begins, the world will look very different. October 14th, 9:12 a.m. After 17 years, 8 months, and 4 days, the gates opened. And James Miller walked out. No chains. No guards. Just the sky overhead, a breeze on his face, and his mother waiting with open arms. She held him for what felt like forever. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. Everything had changed. The world outside was louder, faster, stranger. Smartphones. Electric cars. 1,000 things James had never touched. But the hardest part? Silence. Not the kind from prison walls. The kind that happens when the noise is finally gone, and you're left with everything you missed. His childhood home had been sold years ago. His friends, long gone or strangers now. His father, who passed away while James was still behind bars, never got to hear the words, "He's innocent." But James didn't come back bitter. He came back hungry. Within weeks, he stood in front of a packed auditorium at a local university. They asked him to share his story. He looked out at a sea of faces, young, free, full of questions, and said, "I spent almost 2 decades in a cell for something I didn't do. But the scariest thing wasn't the bars. It was the idea that no one might ever believe me." Silence. Then applause. Then something more, attention. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows invited him. Advocates rallied around his name. He didn't want fame. He wanted change. James partnered with Erin and her nonprofit. Together, they launched a program to investigate wrongful convictions. Within a year, they helped 3 other men get their cases reopened. 3 lives starting over. Just like him. He visited prisons. Sat with inmates. Not to offer false hope, but to show them it was possible. "You're not forgotten," he'd say. "You're not invisible." Some cried. Some stared in disbelief. Some whispered, "I thought I was the only one." But freedom wasn't always easy. James battled insomnia. Panic in crowded rooms. Moments where a knock on the door still made his heart stop. But therapy helped. Time helped. And Lily, a rescue dog he adopted, never left his side. "She reminds me of me," he joked once. "A little broken, but still here." Then, one day, the prosecutor who fought to keep James in prison reached out. He wanted to meet. James could have said no. But he went. They met in a small cafe. No press. No drama. The man looked at him and simply said, "I was wrong. I followed the rules, but I ignored the truth. And I'm sorry." James didn't shake his hand. He didn't forgive. But he nodded. And he walked away with his head held higher than ever. Today, James Miller is more than a survivor. He's a symbol. Not of pain, but of possibility. Not of injustice, but of what happens when someone refuses to stay silent. He tells people, "You can cage a body. You can chain a name. But you can't kill the truth. Not forever." This story isn't just about one man. It's about a system that still gets it wrong. About mothers who never stop fighting. About people who still believe in second chances. And about you, the listener, who might one day be the voice someone else needs to hear. James lost 17 years. But what he found, that might change 17,000 more. Clapperboard the end. Or maybe, just the beginning.